Welcome everybody to the final office hours of the Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro class, the winter spring class of 2021-2022. Pleasure to have everybody here and everybody who's watching after the fact. Today we've got one question, and then we'll go over the final assignments as they're coming up and take on any other questions. All right, so we'll start, pop over here to Ethan's question. I was not given much consideration to earthworks in my design site because of its shallow slopes and composition of almost 100% fine sand. However, looking through Mawson's design manual, I noticed drawings of ridges, mounds, and pits at ground levels that can be built to hold water in gardens and orchard plantings. In a mulch garden, how can I maximize the use of space while still using earthworks to hold water? Trenches in between rows seem to be taking up a lot of space. Should the whole garden be sunken? Would the high amounts of rain drown plants during a large rainfall event? Also, I'm thinking about putting in a pond at a low point to capture overland flow. Would it be worth it to bring in clay? If I use a polyurethane cover, how would the water infiltrate? The goal is to hold water and let it infiltrate, or just hold water definitely for use elsewhere. The pond is situated at a low point. What is the most energy efficient way of pumping uphill? So Ethan has cleverly put about 5 questions into one question. Well done. I do the same thing. And we'll take them point by point and talk a little bit about earthworks in generality, and then we'll get down to your site specifics. And Ethan, if you want, feel free to put in the link to your assignment. That way bring up that information. So when we take a look at earthworks, when we take a look at impounding water, because I think that's really what we're talking about, because I don't know if we're necessarily talking about things like terraces, which are technically an earthwork. So I think we're probably more in the smaller circle of impounding water. When we're taking a look at impounding water, we have to ask a couple of questions first and foremost. Is there value within the design to impound water on landscape? And almost without exception, there is. Now, Bill and others have said that a third of the landscape should be in some sort of wetland. And that number was taken in terms of the amount of wetland space there is in general ecology and terrestrial ecology. But what may or may not have been factored in there is that not all that land was aquatic to start off with. Now, this is where we get a lot of caveats. I'm going back and forth. With that said, having more water on landscape will increase the amount of resiliency and redundancy for watering that you have on that landscape. So if you're just focusing on well water or just focusing on rainwater, having small impoundments in and around that landscape can be useful. And those can be in active rainwater harvesting like tanks, and those can be in passive rainwater harvesting in earthworks that slow, sink, and spread that water and sometimes store that water. So in Ethan's conversation, he's in Florida, it's really flat. So there's not a lot of gradient change throughout that landscape. So with that said, what would you do? So generally in a landscape like that, there's going to be, minusculely a high point and a low point. And I think in Ethan's, we're just going to pull it up. I think there was a canal in his. Just want to make sure that I'm speaking correctly here. Yeah. So Ethan's got an interesting site because it has so much already in it. So there's quite a bit here. And Ethan, can you tell me again if there is even minusculely a high side and a low side? Do you want to type?
Yeah, in the middle of the property, I don't know if you have it pulled up there. There is generally a high point, but and a low point, but
okay. Well, Ethan's here. I'm not hearing him. Let me try this again. Ethan?
That's right. I can hear him fine. Yeah, I can hear Ethan. Okay.
Can you hear me?
I think this is on my side. I think I've got my speaker set to something else. I do. Okay, let's try again. Ethan?
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there is a general high point and low point, but the difference between them is maybe 5-10 feet over, a couple hundred feet.
Oh, that's more than enough. So which side of this is the high side and which side's the low side? Northeast, northwest?
You have the map pulled up there?
Yeah.
Low points on the east side.
East? Okay, so this is
east
low.
Corner, east, yeah.
Southeast corner or just east side?
Yeah, southeast corner.
Okay. And then what's the high side?
It's like generally in the middle. You'll see it sort of in that middle section. It's highlighted yellow.
Okay, you've
future
actually got a
proof
high
of-
point here. High point, low point. Okay, I see now. This is what happens when you read the legend. Everything becomes
There you go.
everything becomes clear. Cool. And then what's the height difference between the high point and the north and the west, or the north, the west, and the south? Is it generally the same as the low point in the southeast?
Say that again.
So you've given us a high point, you've given us a low point. So now I want to get a sense of where does the north boundary, the west boundary, and the south boundary exist between this 5 to 10 feet difference? Are these generally the same low point in terms of their sizing, or are they less?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my cross section, let's see, slide. Trying to find it here.
85.
I mean, up to that high point from the west end of the property, it's pretty flat, and then drops off. Let's see. I'm trying.
Yeah, I'm seeing it here. So basically it looks like the rise in the landscape, it basically rises a little bit going from your A to your middle, and then drops quite a bit more going out to B. Okay. So generally in your site, and you have, I think what you said your soil was sand.
Yep, fine sand, almost 100%.
Okay, so infiltration is quite high.
Mm-hmm.
So basically what we want to do is we want to be able to catch and hold as much of that as possible. So I don't know if, as I look at your landscape, and if how much of this you want to keep, but there's not a lot of space to put in a pond or put in a water retention system as is. So the first question would be, is the client interested in removing some trees for water holding capacity?
Not particularly. They don't want to remove any more trees.
Gotcha.
There is some space in that corner for a small catchment of some sort under this canopy, but I mean, probably 20 feet, 20 by 20. There is space under the canopy, but and it is completely shaded in that area, which I guess would be good for not losing water to evaporation and stuff. But yeah.
Just going to take a look at your rainfall.
Very high, like 4.5.
Very high and sort of very humid. Our low spots look to be November, with April being a close second. Okay. So there's a couple things here. One of them is you could start to create trenched pathways that have quite a bit of biomatter in them. And so the way this looks is using this sort of general high point, low point here, and basically doing trenches on contour or close to, kind of working with your row system, and then filling them with organic matter. What that'll do is twofold. One is it'll give you a place to start to build organic matter. So these are trenches that you fill with debris or wood chips or things of that nature. But also it'll help when water comes into it to spread out and then start to decompose and become more soil. And so what'll happen is with bioturbation, the living soil food web will then start to mix in that material as it decomposes into the sand, and you'll start to have increased water holding capacity as you move down this process. So something like, I'm not saying I know exactly your rows and all the rest of it, but something where you're doing walkways and trenches of where you're kind of digging up the walkways and turning them into trenches, and then having them laterally as you move down that landscape, and you're filling them with organic matter. Now, if you just created them and it's pure sand, all you've done is create more area for for some water to infiltrate. So you haven't really done anything. But if you start to increase the organic matter, now all of a sudden there's a potential to actually create more organic matter that will interact with that soil and over time can start to hold more water. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like what, like a foot deep sort of trench?
Yeah,
Fill it all the way to the top.
yeah, if we're looking at sort of ground, and let's say this is our tree canopy, because these look like relatively large trees as I take a look at your scale here. So yeah, I would say you could go a foot, but because it's so sandy, this would really depend on your materials. And so basically you would run calculations or run potential calculations off of what this trench might look like. So if this trench is a foot by foot by foot, so we'll call it a foot squared, then you'll run your calculations at every foot or whatever that volume would be to understand how much material you're going to need. And I would run this off of how much material you have to put in there. So if you have access to wood chips, if you have access to local trimming companies or arborists, and they can drop those on, I'd build up my pile first, dig this out, then put everything in all at once. The reason for that is, especially in your humid climate, your flora is going to find that and go, that's a great place to live. Whereas you want to fix that and fill that right away. You could do something similar in a hugelkultur fashion. Because your rain is so high and because you're under canopy, I would probably make an exception for my hugelkultur in tropics, which is most hugelkulturs in tropics are going to be below grade. So the way that looks is that if we do a trench, it's usually quite deep and we're kind of mounding up and around. So that way it eventually comes down to this ground level. Whereas most hugelkulturs, when we make them, are high because we're in the temperate climates. But once we get into tropics, we have to be aware that that evaporation potential is higher. So this is basically what we're doing, but in miniature, is we're doing these little hugels, but we're doing sort of wood chip pathways all the way along here, just to increase the amount of biomatter that you're creating. And also it's phenomenal the amount of soil life that ends up in here. These little pathways end up becoming earthworm farms in the places where I put them in. You can go back and harvest them ad nauseum. And this is true for everybody in almost every context. The hotter you are and the more exposed you are, you're not as exposed as others are because you have lots of canopy. But the more exposed you are, you'd sink it down a little bit. But because we have canopy, I'd be fine to put it at grade or a little bit high and let it decompose down.
Would that open up any potential for erosion in high rainfall events, or if
No,
it's
because this is all
tagged with
filled
organic?
in. This is all filled in. So this is all filled in with wood chips, right? So all you're doing is just digging a trench and then filling it with wood chips, mounding it slightly, having it proud slightly. So that way, eventually what'll happen is that it'll drop down. But what'll happen is that that'll become a little repository of organic matter, which will increase the water holding capacity of that area. And what'll happen is these will be like little water holding capacity soil food web reefs, if you will, coral reefs. So in between those plantings, you have this as supplemental. And the reason why I put them in between the irrigation lines is they'll help to supplement that irrigation as well.
Cool.
Yeah. And then your other question about ponds. Yeah, I guess you could put a pond in the lowest spot on the landscape, but that having water in the lowest spot in the landscape is the least useful. What we try to do is we try to put it as close to the high spot as possible, because under that high spot, we have the potential to microgravity feed or with a little bit of electricity pump out to the rest of the landscape. The only question is, how do you fill it? So this is the due diligence that goes back and forth in pond design. So a couple things about pond design. First and foremost, all ponds should be terraced or stepped. And the reason for this is that when it fills with water, what'll happen is you'll have a deep, cool section and you'll have shallow, hotter sections. And what'll happen is with thermodynamics, as this heats up and this cools down, you'll get this great circulation that happens. But at the same time, this deeper section, this is true for everybody in all climates, this deeper section will resist evaporation. So when I was working in Kenya, they had all of these tilapia ponds that were all the exact same height. And basically they'd made evaporation ponds or evaporation pools where you have the exact same water, the exact same height, and it evaporates at the same time and all the fish die. So when I was there, I introduced the idea of terraced ponds. This is the first pond I created. And I made that deep section really deep. If you take a look at my website, it's the Practical Permaculture Institute of Kenya, PPIK. And this was a sort of L-shaped pond. Took 20 guys 3 days to dig by hand with djembes. And then we did a skim of what's called ferrocement. So basically you take chicken wire and then you skim that with ferrocement and you cream the top. And that creaming creates a water impenetrable layer with a bit of water glass, which is a product you can purchase. And this was better for us, especially in areas that have high erosion. This was better for us because if you're using liner, if you're using polyurethane liner or EPDM liner, again, both of those should be non-fire retardant. A lot of these EPDM liners have fire retardant in them, and it's 100% toxicity. It will contaminate your water. So if you do pick up EPDM or polyurethane, make sure it's fire retardant absent. It's absent of fire retardant. So we put in this liner of ferrocement. And what's amazing about this liner of ferrocement is that it's concrete. And so in an area with high erosion like Kenya, or any place that has high erosive capacity, you'll find that you'll get siltation that builds up. So you'll get that water that will hit earth and then come in and then start to silt up your ponds. And so over time with these old tilapia ponds that had EPDM liner, folks were going in and digging out the earth, but they were puncturing the liner. And when you puncture the liner, especially in these situations, it's near impossible to fix. So ferrocement was a really easy way to put this in and also allow it to be dug out. But this is important. This big column of water now all of a sudden had the ability to, and these two successional columns of water had the ability to resist evaporation to the point to where this pond in particular at PPIK in Busia, now holds water year round. They have water all the time, and they can always go in with nets and fish out the tilapia. But before that, there was two other ponds made for tilapia growing, and then the ability to drain them down and then fish out all the fish. So in your situation here, mate, at the top here, this is kind of the area where you'd want it, but it doesn't look like you have anything to actually feed it. Like your houses are quite a bit further away. So, having them feed it would require piping to bring it over and then fill it up. So this is the back and forth that we do when we're working with ponds is we get a sense of what the general shape and area of the pond is, what the liner will cost in terms of the area of that, getting a shape of what the volume is, and then understanding from our water assignments, do I even have the water to fill this? And then what's the value of this and how am I then going to pump it out? And so in this situation, you could pump it out with a small pump, probably a DC pump. But in your situation, the only way to move water without electricity is what's called a ram pump. And a ram pump basically uses head pressure from water. So basically it is water that comes down, and at I think it's a 10-to-1, it will then move water back up. So you do lose quite a bit of water in the process. And so if you have an abundance of water, you can use a ram pump. But if not, then you're kind of out of luck about that one. So I would say you could put a pond down here. It's not as useful only because you still need to feed it. So if you did want to create, because this kind of feels like this is the high side and these are the low sides. If you wanted to, trench out something that would feed this, and then you'd have to line this trench, because of course the infiltration is so great, to fill this, then you could, but you really have to ask yourself, what's the value of this water as opposed to what's the cost of the water you're getting out of your well, or if you're getting it from the city. It all comes down to a cost benefit analysis of just doing your due diligence and writing everything out and going, okay, if we put this in, it's, a pond of this size, taking a look at 72 feet. So let's say we did, call it 50 by 25. you're doing ferrocement, you're probably looking at $4,000 to $5,000 in cement or concrete. And then you're probably looking at $2,000 to $3,000 of excavation costs. But because sand has a very low, what's called angle of repose, which means if you put a pile of sand down, the angle that that pile of sand makes is going to be a lot more shallow than if you said put clay down. You're not going to get very deep without that filling itself in. So, kind of when you look at this over and over, you're probably looking at a built structure or like a pond liner that already has some sides that you can put in and then backfill against it or something of that nature. But again, you get to that question about trying to make it work, and then you take a step back, like, why are we doing this? Is there any value to this? And your water, as I was taking a look at it, you've got your well. Is that correct? Do I remember this correctly? Your water comes from well?
Yeah. There's an electric well water pump.
Yeah. And generally that's quite
during
shallow because the water table is high, right?
The water table is pretty deep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I believe at least 30 feet is the well. I believe the water table's deeper. Let's see.
Well, the well would have to be at the depth of the water table, right?
Right.
But if it's 30 feet, you're laughing. Like, that's generally a high water table compared to getting into Alberta and other places where we're at 4 and 5 and sometimes 1,000 feet.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess groundwater is at 25 feet.
Okay. Yeah, so quite plentiful. So yeah, unless there was a weak link when it came to the electricity of pumping that out, and you wanted to create something that could harvest water passively, and then you'd have to run the numbers between the two. Like, okay, if we gathered this much water and it's here and we still have to pump it through the irrigation system, is that pump electricity less than what's coming up from the pump itself from the well? And just having done this a few times, I'm going to make a wild guess and say no, it's probably not. You're probably going to be in the deficit because of that. But if you had as much mini hugels or mini pathway, mulched pathways, deep mulch pathways, that would start to increase the water holding capacity of your soil. It builds your soil structure as well. It also passively harvests water. So I think that probably does you more for less. Not to mention, if you ran workshops on it, you could probably gather 5, 12, 20 people to come in, learn the process of the practice and get a few of them done. Whereas you're probably going to be moving to a professional level if you're going to be putting in a pond of this scale.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so at that low point during, heavy storms and stuff, there is a lot of water pooling, and it sort of just, leaves the site from there. Are there any other solutions of what to do with that water? Or is it, would it just go on?
Right. Okay. So good to know a little bit more. So we have a little bit of pooling here. So yeah, what you may want to do is either do one of two things. You may either want to put in what's called an ephemeral pond. These are ponds that we actively know are not holding water. What's interesting is that if we dig them out and terrace them and do all that good stuff, they will hold water over time, because what will happen is that organic matter will decompose in them as they catch and collect it from what's outside of it. And so you'll end up with what's called a gley soil, Gley, a gley soil that will create a water impermeable layer. This is the same sort of soils that when you're walking in a pond or a lake and you take a step and your gum boots stay in one place and then your foot comes out. Those are those types of sucking soils. So what you could do is you could do it that way, dig this out, shape this in the way that you wanted it to, and then have it there. If it's already pooling, it's a great place to start with. And just know that water will gather and ebb and flow over time. And if there's other areas where you're seeing that, you could actually interconnect them where, we're seeing some ponding up here, or we're seeing some ponding somewhere else. And then if you wanted to, you could, of course, bring in things like clay. Clay is usually applied anywhere between 12 to 18 inches. And what I found is if you go to quarries that are washing out gravel, they tend to have a slurry of clay, which after it's dried up to about 40-50% of its percentage of moisture per weight, you can then truck that in, usually for just the fee of the trucking. So that would be the other question, is if you could get a truck all the way into the back here, and then layer it out, and then take an excavator and then basically layer it diaphragmatically. So the way we do ponds in your situation would be what's called a diaphragm liner, where we take a material like clay and then we layer it somewhere between like 8, 12, 18 inches. A foot is generally a good layer. Because you're in sand, I'd move towards the 18 because it is so porous. But you could absolutely do that. And then you actually have a repository of water that's being held. The big question is, you have to think about, where does the overflow of that go now? Does that go back off site? And if so, who does that go to? What is the consequences of that? Because at that low point, you're not going to be managing the overflow. You're just going to be showing where it goes, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Any other
I guess
questions?
that's where the question of that pump would be worth it or something like that, or
Yeah, and that's basically just running the numbers on it. Like, we buy the pump, we have to run the electricity. The pump will have a electrical use on it, so you'll basically run the numbers of that, get a sense of, okay, well, how much electricity is this going to take at our tiered level? Do you guys have tiered electricity, or is it flat fee?
not sure.
Okay, because basically, if you have tiered electricity, where if you require more electricity, you move up to a second tier, and that tier has a higher cost per kilowatt hour. You have to understand, if you use that pump, if you then go up to that level, now all of a sudden all your electricity is at that level. So there's a couple of different elements of this jigsaw puzzle you'll have to inquire into to play with it. But it's a good thought. And I would say just do a little bit more research and start to take a look at it. And if you don't get a chance to do that for the final design, just say, this is the direction I'm heading. This is what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. You're welcome. Let's go back to questions, see if anybody, nope. Cool. All right. So let's go over the final assignments here. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to put them in the doc there. So I'm just going to minimize everybody else. Most people are off screen anyways. So local network survey is just getting a sense of the designers, the instructors, the groups, getting a sense of who are the other people in the area that are involved in permaculture or elements like it. So that way you have a place to go after this course. So you have groups or connections. The great thing is that if there is nobody in that situation, then you get to be that group. You get to set that up. You get to be the pioneer in your area. And like we joke, you get to fly your freak flag and have everyone come to that conversation. So this can start off as creating what's called a guild. So we've started a number of them. We did the Vancouver Island Permaculture Permablitz network and guild network. I've been a part of many other groups over the years, both locally and internationally. And these are the types of groups that really support long-term engagement. They support sharing, they support creating and conversing. You get together, you do a needs and yields assessment when you get together as a group, and everyone says, here's what I have to give as a yield. And then you do another round, here's what I yield, capture it on a whiteboard, have people connect. It was a great piece we brought to the Vernon Permaculture Guild and group that I was a part of for years. So we really just want you to get a sense of the individuals around you and start to do a little bit of research in terms of, okay, who's around you and what might be next for you as you go about this. Similarly, that SWOT analysis, if there's nobody around you, the huge opportunity to start to become that network. And even if you're hosting events, showing videos, hosting people remotely for education, that can be a great way to go about it. When I created Permaculture BC right after my first PDC, I was not in a place to teach. I was not in a place to educate, but I was in a place to host. So I could gather people. I hosted permaculture movie nights. I hosted different courses. And as I started to grow in my education, I started to teach portions of those courses to the point where I was able to teach them completely or host events completely myself. Concept plan. So with the concept plan, we're starting off with that existing plan. So start with the existing plan, start with your base map, You may need to go back and tweak it a little bit because now you've gone through the entire course and there may be different elements you want to add in there. And then make sure that you move into that grayscale next. Again, if we have the title block here instead of the horizontal title block, that doesn't mean we want you to switch to that vertical. Just means this is the one we put here to show people that this exists. And then you can put in whatever one you've been using up to this point. Now we get to the concept plan, proposed plan. So what'll happen is you'll take that existing plan, turn it grayscale, and then put in your design elements that are new in color. This is a great way to showcase what's going to be new for your site, what you're thinking. And this can be multiple slides. So lots of different ways to do this. Lots of great examples here from others. Some folks do complete new redesigns, which look great. Some folks do less than that. It's all fine. Just make sure you're showing what it is you're doing. Now, slide 123 is design goals, proposed zones, pathways, fences, and gates. Do you have to put all of this on one slide? No. If it gets confusing, if it gets complicated, feel free to parse this out to other elements. And again, you don't have to use that vertical title block. You can use your horizontal if you have it, and just use multiple different slides. So here we want to see our goals. So what are the goals for the site? Main plan, using bolded highlighting. What are the proposed zones? So what are the zones you are now proposing? Remember, our first zone assignment was what is existing. And then what are the pathways here? What are the areas that we're going to be traversing to move along on this site? So this is a great example of that. We also have fences and gates. Are there new fences and gates that are coming in? So there's an opportunity to take a look at that. Here we get into the concept plan of water management. So here's one of the most important things. Where is the overflow? Where is the overflow going for passive and active? If you show me a rain barrel, show me where the overflow goes. Don't show me just where the usage goes. You have to show that already, but show me where the overflow goes. All water storage and catchment is a drop in the bucket when it comes to the total water potential of your site, which you've seen before. So make sure you show us the overflow. So if you're doing swales, if you're doing terraces, if you're doing ponds, show us where that overflow moves. So we want to know the specific water strategy, the ways which will work in water, specifics for active. So anything that has to do with pipes, anything that has to do with pumps, anything that has to do with storage tanks. Specifics about passive water harvesting. So show us the swales, show us the level sill spillway that's going to overflow. Take a look and show us the existing wells or existing ponds, remembering working with grayscale for existing, color for new. Specify what you'll keep or remove. So if you say, we're gonna move away from this irrigation conversation and set up a new one, make sure you specify irrigation and make sure you realize that pretty much outside of an urban lot, irrigation is probably going to be necessary. It's going to be hard to hand water anything greater than a backyard garden, and even then takes quite a bit. If you want, you can insert charts detailing rainwater harvesting calculations or locations. You can also bring back your rainwater harvesting chart if you redid it and you want to show different elements of it. That's all well and good. So in terms of that soil water management plan, we're going to get a sense of how the water flows and these different elements that are being used. Where are we catching water? What are we doing with it? What are some of the goals here? Again, using bolded highlighting to showcase different elements. Soil fertility. So what is the soil fertility plan for your site? Are you going to be working with things like mulching, lasagna gardening, aerated compost extracts and teas, bokashi? You're going to be working with vermicomposting. You're going to be working with chop and drop. All of these different elements that we came into the soil element, the soil module of the course, we want to then bring into this final concept. What are we going to be working on? And note what you still have to research or look into. This is a working plan, as all plans are. This is one of the major additions to my work from Ben Falk of Whole Systems Design, is that when I started, there was a lot of this idea of our final plan is our final plan. And if anybody knows, if you work with nature, it's never your final plan. It's a working plan at best, and it changes the moment you start to put things into play. As we get down to concept plan, now we get into different elements of vegetation. So this is a great place to sort of to cut in and to do close-ups of different elements, to start to do abbreviated legends of plant names to really showcase the different areas, the rain gardens, the orchards. Maybe you're doing an aesthetic invitation into the site, so showing us that. This can be another detail, so if you've got different areas. So just know that you can move with different details as you're going forward here. Concept plan. So phasing and budget is normally going to be one of the more important elements of what you do for design, understanding what goes first and when it does. So looking at this, I've developed a chart here for you to access. So when you pull up that chart, like all of the elements within this, you're going to have to create a copy of this. Don't ask for permission to access this. I'm not going to give it to you. You need to make a copy like you have before. So file, make a copy. And then this goes on to 5 years. You could go longer. This stands for winter, spring, summer, fall, the elements that they're happening and when they're happening, what potentially the cost might be in your currency, the hours. Generally, without fail, people underestimate cost by 40 to 50% and labor about the same. So chances are part of my response to you is, because I've been doing this for long enough, I'm going to look at it and go, you're probably underrepresenting what that's going to cost or what that's going to take. Now, there's 2 ways to bring in that template, and I go into this into the tutorials of this element. But what you can do is you can just copy this entire thing. So you can go like this. You can copy this, copy, and then you can go into your slide itself and paste it directly in. It's a really cool element of Google Slides. If you have this all as a ecosystem, is you can copy it right in, or you can just take a screenshot. The one thing I do not want you to do is zoom out here at this resolution. Let's go to the actual resolutions where we can see everything. It doesn't want to go lower than 50. Interesting. Okay. To zoom out here and then take a screenshot of this and then bring it in. The resolution's terrible. I can't read it. It doesn't work. You'll lose points for it. Don't do it. So you can go year by year, put year 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can say, click here to take a look at full chart. Remember, if you do share this, you'll have to share this so that way anybody with the link can view, so that way you can come into it. Generally, I like to put everything in here because if you are working with the client, you'll want to give them all this information. So this both gives us a phasing plan of what's going to happen when, and you can also prioritize this if you want, and then put it into play. So then we get into the permaculture principles or social permaculture concepts that you used. So we just want to get a sense of what were the principles or practices you used in this? How did you put them in? What's the conversation there? So you get a sense of the different elements, social permaculture, how you're reaching out to others. And then somebody's been messing with the template again. Too many people have access to this. And then that's it. Then we go into the SWOT analysis. So this is you showing the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of your design. This is me asking you to take another giant leap in your designer's mind and going, okay, this is my design. What are the strengths of this design? What do I know are great? What are the weaknesses of this design? What are the further opportunities in this design? And what are the threats potentially that could affect, or does this design create? So a threat could be, I've put a pond above the house. It's right underneath large infrastructure. It's the first time I've designed a pond. I could do this wrong and I could destroy the house in this site. Though that's the level of designer inquiry and critique we need to have, because the burden is always on the designer. We're basically stepping in and starting to redesign elements of ecology. And so we have to take on that level of burden. So really do take the time to consider and think about this. I tend to take a little bit more time in grading these because I go into depth with them. Folks who go in early may have a chance to get feedback and improve their design if they want, and potentially get more feedback. Do recall that all assignments for the entire course are due on the due date of the last assignment, the last week 10 assignment. So if you are trying to get anything done, feel free to put it down to the floor to get it all done and put it all in. Any questions about the concept plan or about the local network survey?
Does our budget and phasing plan have to be for all 5 years?
No, no. You can do it as much as you like. So if you want to do it for a year, if you want to do it for 2 years, that's fine. I'd like to see some level of phasing and budget just so I know that you've thought about it. Generally, this is moving into more advanced design conversations. So I don't need to see all 5 years, but at least a year is necessary. Does that answer your question, Ethan?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Perfect, perfect.
I have a question. You mentioned hosting earlier. Could you explain a little bit how does it work? It's like you're hosting a podcast and then you invite someone to do the course.
Oh, I
How
see.
does it
Yeah.
work?
So the groups, yeah. So if you're starting out and wanting to create the Miami Permaculture Guild, let's say, basically what I've done in the past is I've created a Facebook group first and foremost, and then I've started to think of the things that I'd like to do. So at the beginning, we showed things, videos like Inhabit, and we showed a number of the soil videos that came out. We started to meet monthly. So we all came together in a group space and we reached out to the local library, and the library said, oh, absolutely, we want to support this. And it was great because they pulled out all the permaculture, farming, horticulture books, threw them down on tables when we had our grouping so people could come by and take a look at them and take them out and work with them. And then off of that, we had enough people to start doing little pechacuchas. We did little presentations where folks could do, I forget what it was, but it's like 20 slides, 20 seconds per slide, something like that, where folks would do presentations about their site or what they're working on. That then led to us having enough people to create a PermaBlitz network. Permaculture, Blitzkrieg come together, PermaBlitz, lightning fast permaculture, created by Dan Palmer and his partner Adam out of Very Edible Gardens in Australia, where you come together with a group of people, have a design, everyone's volunteering their time, and you transform a front lawn, a back lawn into a food growing, water harvesting permaculture design system that then everybody there is then eligible to have their place done, if they, of course, hire somebody or design it themselves or they put themselves up. So we created we got a grant and we made a PermaBlitz network where people could sign up and work with it. So basically it's just saying, I want to host this conversation. I want to be the one who says, yeah, I want to meet like-minded people and I want to talk to them. And this is one of the things when I used to teach in person, and we started a course, I would ask everybody, why did they come and what's their sense of success at the end of the course. And when everybody would tell me why they came, I would always say, because for me, people who are involved or interested in permaculture are some of the best people I've met. They have a sense of the greater whole of society. They're usually quite compassionate. So hosting these groups has been really fun for me because I've got to meet exceptional people in the neighborhood, create lifelong friendships that I still have today, but also have a group of people that if I wanted to say, bring in somebody to speak, and say there was a cost for it or something, we could share it among the group, or we could poll the group of what they wanted to learn. This is something we did in Vernon at the beginning of each calendar year. We'd come together and everybody who came for that first conversation, and usually that was a potluck as well, so everybody brought a bit of food. We would say, what does everybody want to learn this year in this group? And then we would put up all the listings, and same thing as yield and need. We would say that's the need, and then we turn back to the group and said, okay, who could facilitate these conversations? Great. And who wants to find somebody to facilitate this conversation, either in person or digitally? And so this was a great way for us to reach out to locals and internationals to come and talk for 45 minutes to talk about their work or what they love to talk about, and what their work was about. So we had a lot of great conversations from that around vermicomposting, and there was a natural builder in our area who talked about clay plasters. I talked about hugelkultur once, and then I talked about tree pruning and propagation once. And this is just a way of giving back to that community. It's a bit of that third ethic, depending on how you verbalize that. For me, it's always setting limits to consumption and redistributing the surplus back into the community. So, but that's that hosting conversations. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I love the idea. It's pretty interesting. Hopefully I can apply something, but it's just great because I would never think of it, and it's fantastic. I also have another question, but it's not really related to what you just said. It's for the future, long future, if it happens. But let's say one day I become a designer that designs I don't know, places for people. How do I calculate the cost? So like how much I'm going to charge the person? I have no idea how this would work.
Great question. Great question. So when we're starting out with design, there's a couple ways to go about our our pricing model. What I recommend to everybody post a PDC is to find another project locally that has enough interest from the friend, the family member, usually it's somebody you know, that you can work with them. And usually the trade is that you'll do the design either for low cost or free, as long as they put it in, and as long as you can be part of it, and as long as you can photograph it. Why am I starting here instead of telling you pricing? Because the number one thing that new clients are going to want to see is your work. They're going to want to see and get a sense of, oh, this is the work they do, and this is the level of work, and this is what it looks like. And if you can get somebody who will take on the cost of putting that in, that they're ready to go, even if it's small, better off if it's small. I just want a couple of garden beds. Great. We're going to do wicking beds, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. We're going to do in ground. We're going to do above ground. We're going to do balconies. Doesn't matter. As long as you're able to have them say, yes, I'll put it in place. Usually what I did when I started was I'll work for free. No problems. I will work for free. As I got 2 or 3 of those under my belt, I then started to charge around $20 an hour. I was like, okay, I just want to charge enough so that way my time's valued. They know my time's valued, and I go through it. So I started at 20. As I started to learn what I was doing, I started to ask myself, what was the value of what I was providing to these individuals? And so I started to increase my wage as I started to understand the scope and scale of the project. This also has another way of working, in that if you find organizations, especially organizations like group homes, addiction centers, daycares, basically anything within that common community good, they usually have a landscape. It's usually neglected. It usually could use some work. And that's a wonderful opportunity to not only do and work with folks who have a cause, but also it means that the work you do will be seen by a lot of people, because it's usually a very public space. So a colleague of mine, when he just started out, Eric Olson of Permaculture Artisans, he did City Hall in his local city, and he worked with indigenous plants. He worked with local indigenous elders, and the majority of the folks he worked with were Latin American speaking immigrants who came in, and he made a big social media, he made a big media event of this, that they were putting in plants from these different ethnicities and these different groups, and that this was for the community, by the community, and that there was a free harvest pick at City Hall. There was a place where you could go and get food at City Hall. This produced enough work for him to work for the next 3 years straight. He didn't have to do any other advertising after he did that. And so the idea of doing a community supported or community engaged landscape cannot be overstated. The other thing I did when I began is I paid a mentor to help me along with the next step in my design. So I had an educator within my first PDC, Brandon Bauer, who's now a great friend and colleague. And those first couple of designs, I paid him out of my pocket, so that way he could go over my designs and educate me further. And then as I started to receive money, I paid him again, because I wanted to learn and I wanted to get there quickly. I wanted to learn from his mistakes. So what I normally did is I created my design and I passed it by him to see what he had to say about it. And I paid him for his time. Now I do the exact same thing. So I do what's called red team design. And basically at the end of my design process, I give all of my design work to at least 2 other designers. I'm moving towards 3. And what I've done is I've started to trade hours with them. I used to pay them, but now we trade hours. So they look at my work, I look at their work, and we basically go back and forth, and I give them a big red Jiffy marker and I say, tell me why I'm wrong. You cannot get better quicker by opening yourself up to somebody else who's at the same level or better than you and saying, tell me why I'm wrong. And basically they just go through, and we're human. We really like finding mistakes. And generally we're born in a culture that negative scans or replaces critical thinking for negative scanning, basically saying, well, I don't know about this and I don't know about this. And this is where some of my greatest insights into design came from, because I was able to open myself, that humbleness of going, I'm not the best person to design this. It's always going to be in a group. There's always going to be in that group conversation that brings in all the pieces. So that was one of the best things I've ever done, is to bring people in, but also to pay for mentorship, because there's very, 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 very little mentorship within this space. There's no permaculture apprenticeship program. There's a lot of great next steps and next courses you can take, but ultimately it's a choose your own adventure. And so I'll go one more step and say, we talked a little bit about that fire and compost list in one of the very first assignments, where when I work with students in person, back of the journal, one side is fire, one side is compost, take everything in the course, and after every single lesson go, what fired me up about this and what's compost? What's going back to the compost heap to become fertile soil for something else? What I would say is post PDC, as you're taking a look at all those lists, ask yourself 3 questions of the fire list. Let's say you have human you're composting and it's in the fire list, and you say, great, do I have experience with this? And I color code or symbol code it. So it's like, is it an E for experience? Or an S for skill? Do I have skill in this? No. Generally, in most of these things, if this is your first course, you're not going to have them. Do I have skill in this? No. Do I like this? Yeah, I do. And is this regenerative? In that, when I work on it, when I think about it, am I more for it, or does it feel like it's dragging me down? This gets into a bit of psychology, but there's always going to be personal resistance and obstacles in the work that we do. And those come stock, let's call it, in terms of when we come to something, we may have a part of us that's like, you can't do that. That's not good. You're not good enough for that. I generally don't focus on that first and foremost. I just focus on what I can, which is what, after I read or look at, am I more excited by? And for me, it was always water. It was always different types of water holding structures. It was always different types of ponds or tanks or earthworks. I was always excited by it. So I pursued that first. I pursued understanding water at a greater degree. And what was amazing is I came upon opportunity after opportunity after opportunity, because I kept on seeking it out. Of rainwater harvesting guru was looking for a worker for the summer. A local colleague of mine was putting in rainwater harvesting and gray water systems, and I had the opportunity to learn from them. So I basically focused on something I was really excited by, instead of being the everything. We'll always do everything in permaculture. That's part of what we do, is a grand diagnosis. Part of going to a doctor, the best value, 80% of the value, is getting a proper diagnosis and then going in and getting that treated. So always working on your diagnosis is important. But what I found is that once I found this little niche of something I was really interested in and stoked on, I was able to then start to offer myself meaningfully to others for income. That also applies if there's an area or scope or scale you like to work in. I know you did some work on balconies. So if you wanted to, focus on balcony transformations, that would be a small, tight niche for folks to work on. These would be either built or created planters. You do all the work for them, you bring it in, you show them how to use it. Maybe you have online education once a month that teaches them how to work with it. You might be building that education yourself. So that might be a year down the road in the future, like, oh, that's what I'm working up to. Or you might want to work at an urban scale, or you might want to work at a suburban scale, or you might want to work at a farm scale. What's really, 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 really important is that if you've never farmed before, you're probably not eligible to go tell a farmer what they should do on their farm. And I mean this lovingly, I mean this gently, I mean this compassionately. It is my largest pet peeve of people, myself included, who came out of a PDC. I'm going to go tell all the farmers they're doing it wrong. You will not win friends and influence people by going and telling farmers that they don't know what they're doing. So it's only recently, and this is after 13 years of being in this work, when farmers that I work with or farmers that I'm purchasing from, they go, "What do you do?" It's like, "Oh, I'm a regenerative land designer." What does that mean? No, it means I help people analyze and understand how to catch and store rainwater, so that way you don't have to put in more irrigation. I teach them how to do intercropping with different types of plants, so that way there's a multiplicity of product that comes up, because there's always a plant that fails. I take a look at energy. I go through exactly what it is I do. And that only recently has started to have people go, "Huh, do you want to come by and take a look at my place?" Which is really cool to live in a community of farmers and to finally be invited in to talk to them about water potential, or to talk to them about working with bioengineering by doing live staking on their riverbank that's starting to cut out their fields. Super cool place to be. On the opposite side, I've had a lot of clients had an experience with a previous permaculture designer, and we're like, "I'm off of permaculture for the rest of my life," because they told me I was an idiot. They told me I didn't know what I was doing, and they had never farmed. So normally for folks that want to go to farm level design, I recommend go be a woofer, willing workers on organic farms, go volunteer at a farm, go start to build that concept. And then the next thing I'll say is that of that fire list, if there's something you're really excited about and you have a knowledge gap, go at that knowledge gap with everything you have. I want to learn about this, and work with what's called kairos education. So the Greeks had two words for time. One was chronos and one was kairos. Chronos is that linear progression of time. Kairos is the immediacy of time. Now is the time, is kairos. I was, and I'm a recovering information junkie. I would go to every course that was out there. I would read every single book. This is why these are full. And I would spend a lot of time and money in things that were interesting, but didn't actually focus on the core of what I wanted, what I was really stoked about. So we are all generally within the society, we have a certain level of shiny thinginitis. We love the novel. We want that new novel thing. Now with permaculture, I find it's even worse, because we're fueled by some level of I'm helping, I'm saving the planet, which has levels of truth, and we can go into that or not. But when we get into that conversation, we really have to understand, okay, what's the next thing I need? Or, oh, interesting, I'm taking this project. Now I'm going to go get that information I need. And that I've been at this 13, I think that was about 8 years ago. I changed the way I was going at this by saying, if I need that type of information, I'm going to go find that information. I'm going to go find that person. I'm going to go see if I can get time from them. I'm going to buy their time directly. I'm going to work with them directly. And that made all the difference. Now, all of a sudden, instead of stockpiling and hoarding information, this is only one of my many shelves of books, plus the digital assets I have, which number in the like 8, 9, and 10 gigabytes. Plus, when I say that, I now know that I've got another hard drive somebody gave me years ago that is also filled with information I'll probably never look at. So when we talk about pollution, Bill said it best, unutilized resources pollution, and there can be pollution of the mind. And so being very strategic about what it is you want to do next and where it is you want to go can help you in the long run. And I still do this to this day. If I have an element of a project I don't understand, I go and hire an expert. I say, great, walk me through this. How do I know about this? What don't I know about this? And this is true for colleagues of mine who asked me recently to come and do a survey. So I went and did a hybrid survey. We had an RTK ground station GPS a device that we put on the landscape, and then I had a receiver, and I walked through, and then I ran a drone over and created all of this. And he's like, I want to be with you every step of the way. I want to learn this with you. Now he has that education because he works in homestead design, which is another little niche. You could be a homestead design. You could be a property evaluator. This is something that I've recently been getting lots of inquiries onto, and I just love it. They basically give me a property and I get to poke holes in it. It's the best. Who doesn't love just saying, oh, this is why this sucks? And they're so excited because the cost of evaluating the property as opposed to the cost of the property is just minuscule. Just like, oh, okay, that's valuable. So in terms of going about that, that's the way I go. There's a tool I encountered years ago that for me is the most important tool in my toolbox by far. and it's values-based decision-making. This is a process that I've specialized in and now have courses on. Basically what it is, and I'll break it down if you never look at it again, but the course is, what is the value of what I want? What is the quality of life I want within my business in the future? So if I want to do this professionally, and I've worked with a lot of colleagues, both names everybody knows and folks that are just getting started, but values-based decision-making puts the societal programming in reverse. So instead of, I want this and I want this, and hopefully I'll be somebody after it. So hopefully I'll be happy after I buy this new thing or I have this new thing. Instead, it says, what is it that you want to feel? Do you want to have a sense of independence? Do you want to have a sense of being able to give back to people? Do you want your work to meaningfully impact others? Do you want your work to be an expression of the essence of who you are, which is one of my quality of life statements within my values-based decision-making context? And then using that as twofold. One, as a decision-making tool. So if I go about this new project, will then my values be true? And this is completely in reverse. Normally, society tells us to go and sacrifice everything to have the thing, to have the farm, especially with farming. I think I'm personally responsible for talking more people out of farming than into farming, only because when you really ask them, what do you want with farming? They're like, well, I want to be close to nature and I want to be able to, be with my kids and I want to know where my food's coming from. It's like, there are a lot cheaper ways and a lot of ways to get to that with more sleep than farming. Having a homestead, having a farm is a lot of time, money, energy, and lack of sleep, period, full stop. If you love it, if it's an extension of the essence of yourself, great. But if it's not, it's a lot of time, money, and energy. So instead, when people call me and they want to farm, I usually recommend values-based decision-making, which I work with folks one-on-one. We're probably going to be doing we're doing a group course in the fall, or people can take the self-paced course. But basically, it's just that, getting a sense of what do I want my future to look like, and then asking, will this next step bring about that future through a series of questions? So values-based decision-making for me is the tool I wish I had when I started. I would have gotten so much farther, so much quicker, because it would have focused me into just the things that would have brought out the quality of life I was seeking. And more importantly, it would have challenged me on what I thought I wanted. So initially I was like, I want to be an international designer. I want people to be calling me from all over the world. I want to be flying all over the world. And when you become an international designer and you get flown all over the world and you come back dog tired and you're like, my landscape doesn't look like anything because I'm not here. You may or may not be excited about that. I have lots of colleagues that still do that and are still fine with that, still live out of vans and are like, that's the lifestyle they want. That's not the lifestyle I wanted. I wanted a home with a bunch of these elements around me, and I wanted a quality of life that focused on that. And I was more interested in doing local jobs that didn't take me far away, unless they were big, amazing, stupendous, incredible jobs that paid well. Did I learn and did I earn? So one of my quality of life heuristics is that every opportunity I either have to be learning or earning when I started. That's now evolved to it has to learn and earn. I'm non-negotiable about that anymore. It can't just be a great job that pays well that I've done 1,000 times. It's like, I've done that. I know how to do that. And it doesn't really excite me. So you get to a place to where quality of life is more important than everything. And that's what fundamentally changed my life, is when quality of life was more important than everything, how I structure my day, how I structure my week. Right now I work Monday through Thursday with Friday off. So I have a 3-day weekend. In the ski season, Thursday was the day that the ski hill opened after 2 days that the ski hill was closed. And so Thursday became my day off because it was powder day. And so I moved that day to Thursday. Next year, I'll probably be moving to a 3-day work week or potentially a 2-day work week because I have another massive life change and life project that's coming on. And I'm going to need time to focus on that. I only got to a place of understanding that all projects take time because I was actively tracking and taking this values-based decision-making approach to where whenever I took on a new project, I was like, oh, that took way longer than I thought it would. And it's great to say yes, but I don't have the time anymore. So the other thing I'll say, because you've got me on life design now, which is the other big portion of my work, which I just love, is there's an amazing comic book artist named Todd McFarlane, who in the late 80s, early 90s created and reinvented the Spider-Man book, took it from the way it had been drawn since the 60s, put a whole bunch of cool things into it. Marvel said, do whatever you want. And he did. And he invented Venom, which is this cool character. But then he turned back around to them and he was like, listen, I want to be paid more. I want to take this book in the direction I want. And because it got popular, they really started to say, nah, we're going to take it from here. We know best, beyond the fact that they ran the character in the book to the ground. So he split off from the two big comic book house and he created his own independent comic book house called Image, which to this day is the largest independent comic book house. Created an amazing original character named Spawn, which still to this day is the most popular independent character. And then he got an opportunity to do a lot of different things. He was doing the comic book. He wanted to make toys. Hasbro told him nobody's going to pay $10 for a toy and it'll look photorealistic. And he was like, yeah, if you give them value, they will. So he created, McFarlane Toys, which now does everything photorealistic from TV shows to sports. And then he started doing games. And then he started doing movies. And he realized something really important. He could only juggle so many balls. He could juggle 3 balls really well. But at 4, things started to falter. And there's 2 types of balls. There's what's called crystal balls and rubber balls. Rubber balls can bounce. Nothing happens. Most of our work is like that. We forget that because we live in this weird culture that idolizes work over everything else. We can usually drop work and it'll bounce back. What we can't let drop without cracking or breaking and then having problems is usually relationships, our personal health, our sense of mental health. And so what he figured out is that he had a number of balls he could juggle, including his family, which was important to him. And he wasn't able to go beyond that. When I learned that, I took that into life design and said, okay, I can take 1 or 2 outreach projects, OSU being an outreach project because it's education, regenerative living being an outreach program. And that's generally what I can do. I've wanted to do a podcast for years. I actually have a number of episodes recorded and ready to go. I just don't currently have the time for it. I haven't made the time for it because it currently isn't the most important thing for me. Then I go down to life design. I can take on anywhere between 8 to 12 life design clients on any one of the different areas I help them with. Building a business, working on values-based decision-making, working with something called voice dialogue, which works with part works and personal resistance. No problem. Once I get past 12, it's over. If I remove a day from my schedule, that moves down by 3 people because I can take on about 3 people a day with everything else I'm doing. So it's really important to understand how much you can juggle of whatever it is you're working on. Chances are you already have a piece of work. If you're going to build a new business, you need to think, how much of it can I juggle and how much can I juggle it so I don't burn out? Here's the big secret. If you burn out in doing something new, it'll be very hard to restart and it'll be very hard to be successful. And so my big approach has always been to work with something that has a low bar that I can walk over. So has a lot of potential success points. So that way, every step along the way, the success of that project is felt. So that way I get excited by it. Years ago, I was going to become a financial advisor. I was getting my insurance tickets and all of this. And they had a really important lesson about debt reduction, which is to work with what's called the snowball effect, which is not to take the highest APR, the highest interest rate, or the highest, the largest amount that you owe, but to take the one that's the most easiest. We're very simple creatures. If there is something that is successful, we will do it more so. If it's not successful, we will stop. This is why when I work with clients and we're growing their own food, or we're working with folks within the family food security program, we'll start with mint. Grow all your own mint for a year. Why? Because it's dead easy. You go, you buy the mint, you put it into 4 or 5 gallon containers. You put those gallon containers in the ground. You don't let them spread. You water them. You have enough mint for a year. You cut, you dry, you put into a jar. Super simple, easy, success. Colleague of mine, Darren Doherty, who created the Agrarian, says you start with rocket. Rocket is their word for arugula. Arugula is really simple to grow. So arugula for them was that idea of start simple, start small, and then build upon success. So I know I've gone really wide and varied to your question, but as we come back down, hopefully you can take all those pieces and go, start with something you love and like and are interested in. Start with a small niche that you know you can do, balcony gardens, or, hey, I'll help you grow all your own potatoes for 1 year. Something really simple and easy that you can do over and over. Start with people that know, like, and trust you, family, friends. Start with people that will put that into play. They will actually go, yeah, I'll put that in. No problems. I'll do that. Great. Document, 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 document. Document before pictures, document during pictures, document after pictures, and then have a relationship or have an agreement with these folks that you can come back to that site to take photos. year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and you can show how it grows. So important to show ecological systems as they grow through time and space. Really, 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 really important. If you need education, go get that education when you need it, or go pay people to give it to you. So I work on average between 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 former students that come from each course. They reach out, they want mentorship, they've got a project to work on. Fantastic. I just walk through the same thing I do, but I go into much further depth because all the time that I have is their time. They basically borrow my brain for the time that they contract. It's what I did. It was really useful and successful. Be a part of groups that are a part of this conversation. So if you don't want to create the group, that's fine. Try and find groups like it. Sometimes you can co-op groups that are about like organic gardening, but generally it's best to create a siloed container. This is a permaculture group, or this is a regenerative land care group. I think we talked about it before, but the reason why I'm a regenerative land designer and not a permaculturalist is because permaculture is a tool in my toolbox. It's a tool I use in what I do. And if the carpenter comes and pulls out a screwdriver and the homeowner goes, "Oh, screwdriverist, I'm so glad I hired you." It's not the point. The point is that we are holistic individuals that are working on a holistic subset. But again, going back to values-based decision-making, that we're working at something that delights and excites us. So don't become the Javin Marisha, Dow, Robin Francis, Jeff Lawton of the world and miss being you, which is so much more important. And I've spent a lot of time trying to be a lot of other people. It's a huge waste of time, taken more time out of my life than anything else. So really focus on, oh, this is what I love. This is what I love to do. This is one of the reasons why I have a life and land design company, because I do a lot of life design because I love it. A lot of colleagues of mine are like, "Do you really like talking to people about their problems?" Yeah, I do. It's something I enjoy. It's something I'm good at because I've gone through it myself. I get it. I understand. I wasn't raised on a farm. I was raised in a city. I wasn't raised gardening. I had to learn that. But I did have a lot of personal trauma and personal issues when I was growing up, to the point where I built a lot of skill in that area that I just natively had. This is this whole conversation of your wound is your womb for whatever that life change can be or whatever that skill is. And for me, life is about finding your gifts and then giving them meaningfully to others in a way that works for you and them. The other recommendation I'll say, and I must have said this before, but Derek Sivers' book, Anything You Want, highly recommend. Short little book. He created the first online CD music store. And the main thrust of that is in the title. Your life, your business is anything you want. It's your version of utopia for you and for others. It can be anything you want. Just take the time to really conceive, to precog what that can be for you. And then make sure that you work on that with a ruthless clarity of vision. Ruthless clarity of vision is like being pregnant. You're not kind of pregnant, and you're not kind of in your ruthless clarity of vision. You're either are or you aren't. So on every step of the way, if you have a new individual that comes to you or a new something that comes to you, you can always go, is this or is this not within that ruthless clarity of vision? And you can make the choice. Sometimes there's bread and butter work. And especially when you're starting off, it's like, I took the job because I had to take the job. And a lot of design companies come to me because they started doing fences, they started doing hardscapes, they started doing decks and flagstone patios, but they haven't put in an edible plant or a functional plant in years. And so I help them to get onto that track. And it's tough. It takes time because you're so used to taking the deck, you know how to make it work. But transitioning, especially for companies that want to transition, it does take a bit of work. And that's the same for all of us. It takes a lot of work. So yeah, that's my long-winded but short answer, because I've gone into this in depth before. Also, Jamie Wallace and I are thinking about doing sort of one-off sessions about creating design companies. These would be one-offs about like one session about contracting, one session about estimating, one session about hiring good people. So if you are interested in things like that, feel free to go on to allpointsdesign.ca. At the bottom, there's the newsletter link. Sign up, and when those sessions are happening, we'll let everybody know. We're full out now for the summer. We thought we were going to be able to get a few out, but this is the thing. When you're in when you're in this world, you end up having this seasonal income watershed, and some areas start flowing at certain times. Some are like, Mississippi during a flood. Spring generally is the busiest time of year for me, when I have to delay or defer enough people into the summer and the fall, because I'm just booked solid for the entire year by about this time. and people call and they're still asking. It's like, this is the funny thing about humans, especially non-ecologically literate humans, is they forget that there's all these systems that are dependent on the systems they want. So it's a funny thing, but it means that we get the opportunity to pass off work to other people and other conversations. So anyways, long-winded answer. And the most important question, does that answer your question?
No, very much. Thank you very much. It was great. Like all the ideas, all the advice. I really love it. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so welcome. Awesome. Cool. I'm just going to go back and see if anyone's popped another final question or if anybody has a final question. Oh, of course there is. Adria, looking back at our discussion about high humidity climate with plenty of water year round, we talked about placing the trails slightly off contour downslope favoring ridgeline. Is the goal of that to prevent standing water and retain water along ridgeline so it could be a sort of reserve? Do you create a poster size master plan at this point so you can see all the details in one place? Great double question. So yes to question one. Favoring the ridge off contour is a key line geometry approach. So key line design created by P.A. Yeomans, basically taking a look at how do we redistribute hydration, usually focusing on what's called the inflection or the key point, which is the point of inflection just after inflection in a primary valley. There's a whole conversation about that, good videos in the course. But when Adria and I were talking on a call, we were talking about, because she's in a humid climate, it has a lot of rain already. And because the water table is generally really good, we don't necessarily want to overburden the soil with water and then turn a terrestrial environment into an aquatic environment, because that terrestrial soil needs terrestrial conditions. It needs air. So if you make it into an aquatic environment, all the organisms drowned out, you get a small bloom of nutrition, and then you have less than you started from before. Same thing as tilling. So if you have pathways that are off contour, that are high in the valley and low on the ridge, generally that water moves away and has some mobility. The reason why that's useful is that it's not slow spreading and sinking specifically. It's slow spread and sinking, but predominating an area that is normally dry. So basically, it's redistributing hydration due to earthworks on a landscape. That then means that the goal is you don't have standing water, as Adria said, and you move water towards the ridges. Now, in extreme situations of this, where they were working with like eucalyptus and a couple of hardwood trees in Australia, the underground root system of those trees created almost like a pipe drain. And yes, indeed, there was a shimmer or a sheen on the ridge, which normally there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be water on the ridge, but you get a more equalized distribution of water on the landscape. And PA said it best. If you get the keyline pattern basically 60%, you get 80 to 90% of the value. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is the great thing about nature. So yeah, that's generally what we do, is we redistribute hydration, and keyline is great for that. Permaculture is like contour central, even though they talk about keyline in the PDM, Permaculture Designers Manual right there. But in some situations, it's actually more useful to work with a keyline pattern, usually at broad scale. In small scale, contour work is usually fine, and just making sure you have overflows that are sized appropriately. But that's usually the best way to go about it. Before I go to your next question, Adria, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to make sure I understood the primary goal there.
Totally. Yeah. Awesome. So the second question, do you start creating a poster size master plan at this point so you can see all the details in one place? Yes and no. So years ago I did. And especially when I was doing work by hand, I totally forget the size of paper, but it fitted on that. I still have all of my gear for that. But yeah, we used to do that and then put in all the details. And then as I was working on larger and larger properties, we did larger and larger and larger scopes and scales. And so now what I do is I work digitally at that scale, and then I have the ability to print it if the client wants. But I usually leave that to the client, all depending on the deliverables. So something I've become very honed into and detailed oriented is I will try to get away. That's the way I put it. I would try to get away with the least amount of digital rendering because it takes a lot of time. And my justification for that is a good colleague of mine, Neil Bertrando, who is on the for-credit side of this course. He designed in PowerPoint. And when I looked at it, there was something about it that personally offended me. I was like, those are just circles and lines. And he looked at me and goes, I'd rather my clients pay for the install than pay for me rendering. It was an epiphany. It was an epiphany to me of a scale that I'm still reeling with today and still struggling with today because I like pretty pictures. The value in this work is thinking through right plant, right place. Do I have enough water? Is the solar scaping of the plant enough to produce enough? Have I left enough time and space for maintenance? Is the successional planning intelligent in that this oak tree is 20 years to maturity? What am I going to grow underneath in those 20 years? And what's going to successionally come after the next? Bill Mollison intelligently called us time scouts. And that's so true. We're scouting through time. So all of that, the majority of the value of what we do happens in between the ears, and the rendering is just so we can get it in the ground. Some people want a pretty picture, and I have now put that outside of my work. I put that outside of my work, and I said, if you want a pretty picture, that's fine. Here's what rendering typically costs. Here's generally what I do. I generally create a Google Earth map of different areas, and then I do simplistic drawings of each area. So that way it's very simple to understand where each area is. And I can't tell you how much flack we got when I finally made the template, because people thought they were going to learn how to work Adobe as well as learn permaculture at the same time. And it's just a whole other skill set. And if I need a renderer, I hire a renderer and I give them my simplistic drawings. I show them examples of the past and I say, great, I want this. If somebody needs a 3-dimensional model that they can fly through and put to music because they're going to give to a board of directors, great. That's a cost. That's a cost. And I'll cost that out as soon as I have it. Generally, it runs between this and this, and it's always going up. So that's generally what I do, is I go for something simplistic. If people want to learn how to use the Adobe suite, Dan Housley's United Designers is a great course. It goes through Adobe. He has an entire palette of plants that you can learn from and work with. I think it's under $1,000 in terms of the basic course, and then it goes up from there. But ultimately, I would rather people spend their time on the thought process and get really good with design, and then have a phasing plan that's, again, circles is fine. Like this is the funny thing. We give you a deciduous circle and a conifer circle, and we show you how to do abbreviated legends. And without fail, almost everybody goes, I want the cool thing that makes me look like a landscape architect. We're not landscape architects. This is the other thing. We're not landscape architects. We're regenerative land designers. We're looking at how to create ecological systems that persist into the future, that help with human habitation. That's the big value we bring to it. And then you can add different skills upon that. One of the skills I brought into my skill set this past year, which is hilarious because I never really had it. I knew how to do it, but I never really codified it, is how to codify and understand and calculate how much food a family eats, how much food each person eats, how much linear row foot I needed, how many seeds I needed, how many trees I needed, and to have that. So that way, if somebody needed that as a design element, I could have that, which anybody could learn if they wanted to with that family food security program, either the self-paced or the live course at Regenerative Living. But yeah, I do big posters when people want big posters, and when people don't want big posters, the computer is a wonderful zooming tool, which has basically made that obsolete for me. So I can go down in detail and I can put in all the detail I want, or I can make a close-up and do the detail of that planting. And I've opted for that. I've opted for a general design that has areas, has bubble diagramming. And if you've gone through the tutorials, you'll know already that I design in rooms. So here's the microclimate room and the zone, and generally the area that it's around and the frequency of usage. And this is what the client wants. Okay, this is generally where this is going to go. And then I'll go in, and in scale, I'll start to design that out. And everything starts with drawing on the iPad or pen and paper, and then slowly getting down to a scaled model. Because as we get into solar analysis, as we get into water, we have to be at scale, because eventually we have to be in a phasing plan and a budgeting plan. So I say all of that to more completely answer the question in my mind, to say that, yeah, we can work at poster scale and we can produce posters, which is great and awesome. And this is why the template is at 11 by 17, because I came for a while. I just worked in 11 by 17. A colleague of mine worked in it. He had a 11 by 17 scanner printer, so he could scan his designs, put them back in, take them out. I wish I had learned about it before I was working at that scale, because it's really hard to take this big clipboard out to the landscape, but this works too. And then you just do a lot of cut-ups, a lot of close-ups and blow-ups of different areas. So great question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, this is it. This is the final one. Any final questions? I'm happy to stay a few extra minutes. Obviously, we're already 30 minutes over, but any final questions before we say sayonara for our office hours? And we've got our final submission next Monday for all design assignments. Just a big thanks. Oh, that's super kind of you. Awesome. Great. Well, it's been super fun, folks. You guys have been a very active class, been lots of great questions, lots of good humor. I'm seeing Steve now say that he was personally attacked at some point. I don't remember what it was about, but
I think it was about the shine, chasing shiny,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I feel personally attacked when I say it.
Yeah. Well, while I have the stage, I do want to say thank you for this. Has been obviously the beginning of the journey for a lot of us. I love the phrase, PDC is a great place to start, but a terrible place to finish. And this is definitely set up. I can speak for myself, but I get the sense for everyone else that this was really, really useful, insightful, daunting at times, intimidating and crazy. But I think you did a wonderful job sort of like shaping the river of our mind, whatever, metaphors fall apart, but you know what I'm saying. So just thanks, big thanks.
Wow. Thanks, man. Thank you. That's it's very touching. I appreciate that. If I could blush, you'd see me blushing. Oh, thanks, man. Yeah.
I'll take a laugh.
Yeah, it's perfect.
A chuckle out of Jav and I'm good.
You've had a few. You had a few. I have had problems trying to decide if I should ever include some of your more hilarious slides as examples for other students. I've opted just to share them with colleagues, and then share them with my supervisors and saying, I really want to put this in as an example. I know I can't, but I want to.
Yeah, that's it. Guys can't design his way out of a paper bag, but he's funny. So that's, what.
Oh, you can design really well. You've put together some really good designs. I just love having
Thank you.
a bit of humor into it, because it's life's too important to take seriously. So that jives with me. Oh, look at all these things. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's awesome. All right, folks. Well, we're into the last stretch. Any questions or comments before next Monday, feel free to reach out. Remember, we all learn from mistakes. They don't have to be our own. So please do reach out if you need any questions, comments, queries. Next steps after this, again, keep in mind that Kairos education. I really recommend that advanced climate resiliency course, only because it does focus on what is the climate going to look like and how can we adapt to it, which is, I think, a really important piece. And a designer colleague, originally a student, but now a colleague in Cyprus, said it best. He's like, there'll always be a time before and after this course, this climate resiliency course, because it really taught me to take a look ahead and really be a time scout. And so I do really recommend that course. We have a number of courses coming up with regenerative living.online, a couple of great water courses. So if you're into rainwater harvesting, gray water harvesting, or composting toilets, plus we might take a look at a rainwater harvesting course with Gord Baird of eco-sense.ca. That's coming up. So please make sure to be on my mailing list, allpointsdesign.ca or regenerativeliving.online. We've got a course about grazing with goats. We've got an amazing shepherdess who's running an incredible company out of Alberta called Bad Plant Management. She's got a sense of humor. And so if you're interested in goat grazing, that's a great course as well. We've got a course about coppice agroforestry, which is about how do you keep a forest in a way that you cut and come again, just like you do with salad greens instead of a clear cut, which I'm really excited to be working on with Mark Krawczyk, who's got a book coming out on that. We've got a course that's going to be about fruit and pigs with Eliza Greenman, which I'm super stoked about. That'll be a fun course as well. And then I'll be doing a values-based decision-making course in the fall, a group course. If you're interested in it, highly recommend it, only because it's been a tool that's really helped me. So yeah, that's I think most of what's coming up, and we'll chat again real soon. All the best to everybody, and looking forward to your assignments. Take care, folks.